Hello, management scholars. This is Dr. T with another chapter spotlight. Today we're going to cover chapter 4, which is global management, managing across borders. You know, I feel like I could teach an entire class about this. Oh, wait, I actually do teach an entire class about this. It's called Business 4527 International Business. If you haven't taken Business 4527, I encourage you to take it. It's a very fun class. We take a very deep dive into this thing called globalization and doing business internationally. But for today's spotlight, we're going to keep it short, maybe 8 to 10 minutes, somewhere in that sweet spot for these spotlight videos. But it's very fascinating. If you imagine the enormous complexities of running a business, even just locally, expand that to regionally, maybe within the U.S., it gets even more complicated because state laws vary. Uh, Believe it or not, within the United States, cultures vary from one region to another. I'm a New Englander, and it was very fascinating to me, is the word I would say, when I would visit places in the deep South when I was a kid, in pockets of Georgia, like in Waycross, where it was a different culture. But that's even within the U.S. Now let's talk about how complex it can get when we talk about doing business across country borders, doing business internationally across the globe. It gets very complex. So the purpose of the spotlight isn't to cover every single aspect of it. It's just to cover some of the highlights, or in this case, a spotlight. So what is this thing? I mentioned the word once, this thing called globalization. Get my laser pointer out here. So globalization, and sometimes I hate to just read things word for word, but it has to do with how things have become more interdependent across time, how the globe has kind of just shrunk, and there's a number of factors that have contributed to this thing called globalization. Generally, when we talk about globalization, it's the globalization of markets and it's the globalization of production, two separate things. And so one of the biggest factors, the main factors that has contributed to globalization, that has contributed to kind of just the world just shrinking, are these massive upgrades and improvements and shifts in technology. And I put these two photos in here to illustrate the point. And, you know, a couple of years ago, I get this text or an email from somebody, and at the bottom, his signature, the guy who sent it, it said, sent from an iPhone, a device that has the same, if not more, computing power than the entire NASA Apollo 11 mission. And so I have a snapshot from 1969 here. This is a NASA station with, look at all these computers. Look at just rows and rows. It probably does not even show like other rows. This is just one snapshot compared to an iPhone or a smart device. It could be a Samsung or whatever. It's the same deal, but has more computing power in one tiny device. And there's something out there called Moore's Law, which states that every 18 to 24 months, the processing power of microprocessors will double, and within that same time frame, the cost to produce them gets lower. So when you combine these two things happening, now we see how just from 1969 to 2025, which in the grand scheme of human history is just a blip, how technology has advanced so rapidly, and as a result, it has shrunk the world. Right? In my in-person class, I told this story about how, you know, if I met somebody back in the day, this is before computers, this is before the internet, we would have to become pen pals if we didn't live together. If we met at summer camp or something like that, we would exchange physical addresses. They would go back home, I would go back home, and then we might write a letter. Hey, how you doing? It would take 2 weeks for that letter to get there, maybe a day or two for them to get around to reading it, maybe another day or two to them to get around to writing me back, and then maybe a week or two before. So think about that. Maybe once a month or once every 2 months, we might have this communication. Who knows what might have changed when it was in the mail? Maybe something even changed while it was being delivered. Fast forward to modern times, and you all have the capability to be instantly in contact with people around the world right now in real time. You could jump on your phone right now and text somebody in Taiwan. You can get a response from somebody in Colombia. All around the world, France, Italy, you name it. You can be in constant, persistent contact, communication. You can live stream something and people all around the world can watch what you're doing live. It's unbelievable. But technology, and it's not just computers, it's the technological advances in shipping and transportation. Jets have gotten faster, able to carry more cargo. All these things have shrunk the world and led to this thing that we call globalization. So here it is again. It's just a number of factors have just made the global village possible, right? And here's so again, we're not going to get into the details of why, as a business leader, you would decide to do business internationally or not. It's a very big decision. Often it comes down to this thing called attractiveness. You have to weigh the risks, the benefits, the costs, do a cost-benefit analysis, I should say, and then weigh the risks. But here's some reasons why you might want to do it. Let's just say that the products that you make use a lot of aluminum, but where you live, in the country where you live, there's a very limited supply of aluminum. So you may want to set up a headquarters or set up some type of business relationship in another country that has ample supplies of aluminum or oxide, where you mine the oxide and then you convert it into aluminum. You might want to get into new markets. Let's say you have saturated your particular country and you want to bring it to other places. You want to expand it to new markets. When it comes to the globalization of production, let's be honest, it is the labor costs are lower, cheaper labor, to use another term, in other countries, less developed countries. So if you were Nike and you wanted to produce and assemble and manufacture your products in the United States, we have something called the minimum wage. Many states have exceeded the minimum wage. It would cost you a lot more. The labor alone would cost you a lot more to manufacture and produce them in the United States. So what's the solution? Let's export the labor to places like Indonesia and other places where the labor costs are much, much lower. And another factor is if you want to avoid tariffs and quotas, then perhaps you just manufacture it in the home country. So right now there's a lot of talk in the news about tariffs, a 50% import tax on Indian goods. And so if India is compelled that, hey, we still want to sell our products in the U.S., but to import them into the U.S. Or to export from India imported by the U.S., it's a 50% tariff. So maybe we can set up a company that can manufacture these goods right in the United States, and that would get around the tariff because it's being produced and manufactured in the United States. These are some reasons that make doing business internationally attractive. There's a whole chapter on culture. I love talking about culture. We see it's a shared set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns of behavior common to a group of people. Geert Hofstede, who we'll talk about in the next slide, did these massive studies on national culture. But even within a nation, depending on the size of the country, culture can be different from one region to another, as I talked about in the opening here, right? As a kid who grew up outside of Boston, a city guy, the culture is a certain way in New England or in larger cities compared to the culture in a more rural area, in a more country area. And so even though we're all Americans, but the culture is a little bit different. And so the language is still English, but the accents are different and kind of some of the jargon that we use, if you will, was a little bit different. Like in Boston, we say, "Hey, you guys! Hey, you guys! What are you guys doing?" In the South, we typically say "y'all," right? So just little things like that, but the culture can be different. And so, like I said, Geert Hofstede came up with these 5 dimensions of national culture. And so I'm not going to cover them all just to keep it a little bit shorter because this is a spotlight after all. But it's individualism and collectivism, power distance, which I'll talk a little bit more about to highlight, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, long-term versus short-term orientation are the 5 that Geert Hofstede developed. Now fast forward to today, and in addition to Hofstede's model, we have the Globe Project, and I'm going to send you a link, and it's very interesting because you can go online and you can check the data. So maybe you want to check power distance, and you can plug in different countries, and it will tell you the countries that scored high in power distance compared to those that might have scored lower in power distance in all these dimensions, and you can kind of check these things. It's interesting stuff to me. We do it as an in-class exercise in my international business classes. But to highlight power distance, so South Korea is a country that is high in power distance. And power distance essentially is the degree to which the culture in a given group of people, in a country, in a region, in a society, in an organization, accepts and expects that power is distributed unequally, and they're okay with that. So typically what we see in a country that is high in power distance is if somebody has a title, they're very high on the organization, a VP or something like that, and you happen to be, like an entry-level employee, you're gonna do exactly what that person says. You're not going to question it because of the power distance. In other countries, such as the U.S., some of the Nordic countries, Austria is another example, Israel, have low power distance, meaning, okay, I understand that there's a distance here or a gap in the power. You've got this title, I'm here. But if something doesn't make sense, I'm more likely, or I'm okay, I feel okay asking, hey, could you clarify that? That didn't quite make sense. I think we might be going in the wrong direction if we continue to do this. So I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, and in one of his books he covers this whole thing about power distance as related to Korean Air. Korean Air was experiencing a number of tragic airplane crashes, and so people were trying to figure it out, like, hey, they appear to be very well-educated pilots, very skilled pilots. It wasn't necessarily the weather. It wasn't mistakes or mechanical failures in the aircraft. What was going on? So they started to listen to the communication within the cockpit, and what they noticed is that if the captain was going to do something that would put the aircraft in danger, the rest of the crew would tiptoe around correcting the captain because they had high power distance. And so the captain made some bad decisions that could have been corrected by, the co-pilots, lower ranking pilots in that crew, but because they were so caught in this power distance, they didn't say anything. They were afraid to speak up because of power distance. And so what we started to do is we started to expose South Korean pilots to U.S. air crews. They would train together in hopes to diminish the power distance, at least for pilots. And what we found is the crashes and the mishaps in Korean Air was diminished. So that's going to wrap up Chapter 4 highlights, dealing with culture, dealing with globalism, dealing with doing business internationally and globally. I hope you enjoyed this short little spotlight. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Have a great day. Have a great week. Go Nighthawks.